Well, I'm going to speak as a scientist because one of the interesting things about this book is that it's really the introduction of social science in a major way into the public debate. And, you know, I want to start by telling you that I'm fully aware of how powerful this social science is, and maybe more aware of people who aren't used to dealing with statistics. I mean, there are no effects in social science, and maybe none in medical science either, that even approximate the power of the effects that Dr. Wilkinson is demonstrating. So his effects on average are about 3 times stronger than the strongest of all other effects ever recorded in social sciences. So, for example, one of the biggest effects in social science is the relationship between intelligence and academic grades. And it's about 1/3 as big as the average effect in Dr. Wilkinson's book. So I'm absolutely staggered, really, as a psychologist, by the magnitude of what he and others have demonstrated. I got familiar with this when Martin Daly and Margot Wilson published their data on male homicide, because I've been very interested in aggressive behavior. And as a psychologist, I'm always interested in individual differences in aggressive behavior, you know, why there's a particular murderer and what his motivations might be. But I read Daly and Wilson's work, which basically shows that the only thing that causes male homicide is status inequality. And I thought, well, in some ways, I might as well just go home. Like, no, I'm serious. Like, the question's answered. Now, there are other unanswered questions that lurk beneath the surface. So, and I want to get to them in a moment. I want to tell you for a second maybe a little bit more about why inequality demolishes people. But I would also like to say we don't want to get too quick about equating inequality with money. What we're looking here at is dominance hierarchy status. And lobsters even suffer from dominance hierarchy status decrements. And the reason I'm telling you this is because lobsters aren't very complicated. They hardly have a brain at all. But they're smart enough to know when they're at the bottom of the heap. And it has nothing to do with money. And one of the very interesting things about Dr. Wilkinson's book is right off the bat, he shows you that we're not talking about poverty, because poverty is gone by $15,000 a year gross national product, or per capita income. So, and even describing what we're looking at as relative poverty, I believe, is dangerous. And it's dangerous because it specifies the precise cause, and we shouldn't get too quick about doing that. We should remember, for example, in the 20th century, some of the worst excesses that were ever committed in the name of anything were committed by people who were trying to abolish inequality and who would use any means to do so. So we have to be, I mean, I'm not quibbling a bit with the strength of the relationships that he's discovered, or that he's, you know, popularized and helped discover. But we don't want to leap from definition of the problem to definition of the solution too quickly, because it's not simple. It's very complicated. And if you solve a complicated problem in the wrong way, you make it worse fast. And, you know, our societies work pretty good, all things considered. And our system is also, like a market system, has also been the driving force behind eradicating poverty as such from much of the world. And we also don't want to forget that poverty rates around the world, absolute poverty rates, have fallen by about 40% since 1990. And that is a stunning accomplishment. It's basically one generation. And we're seeing the rise of average incomes all over the world in places like India and China, where that was never happening before. So we also don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Now, the reason that status is so important to people, there's a lot of things about this that aren't yet acceptable fodder for public consumption, because people aren't going to accept the implications of these findings easily. But I can tell you about some of the things that you might accept. So, for example, what happens to you if you suffer a decrement in status, in primate dominance hierarchy status, is that your brain stops producing as much serotonin. And serotonin is the master neurochemical. And you might think about it as the conductor of your mental orchestra. Everything is under its control. The serotonin system sets up your brain, for example, when you develop in utero. And if your serotonin levels drop, what that means is that your sensitivity to negative emotion increases and your sensitivity to positive emotion decreases. You become more irritable and less hopeful. And the concomitant of having your negative emotion system become more sensitive is that you start producing a lot more of the stress hormone cortisol. And that's bad news. Like, cortisol just wipes you out. And the idea that it's associated with more rapid aging is a good summary statement. It produces cancer and diabetes and obesity and heart disease and degenerative neural diseases, and you name it, it's a bad thing. So that's the mechanism. Take antidepressants, which, by the way, work on lobsters, which is quite an interesting fact. Well, it shows you how primordial the circuit is. When you take antidepressants, what
30
happens
seconds, Jordan.
Yep. When you take antidepressants, they tap your serotonin levels back up, and of course we know that there's an epidemic of antidepressant use, and that's basically why. The book deals a lot with the idea of comparative poverty, but what we have in front of us isn't poverty. What we have in front of us is a society that's eradicated the problem of poverty and is now directly confronting the remaining problem of status inequality. And I would like to just suggest for a moment that reducing that, in the West, the reason that the relationship between status and money is so close is because at a cultural level, we've identified being wealthy with having high status. And so this problem may not actually be a problem of income distribution precisely. It may be a problem, and I mean this most specifically, it may be a problem with materialism, is that we've reduced status to a single index, and the index is money. And you might think, well, there's no way of dissociating those two, but aristocratic societies used to do that. So for example, in the medieval world, you could be aristocratic and high status, and people who had money were low status. And so it's our tendency to attribute status to money that's at least at part at the base of this problem. So.
Thank you, Jordan.